Dan Jensch, I'm the current chair of the chamber, and with great respect to all of your individual ideas, the reality in St. Paul is that you work in coalitions, and I'd love to hear last from Roger on this, given his track record, but I'd like to hear from the others what idea you bring to help to marshal the political muscle of this area. What's your idea? Given the political shift of power to the suburbs and certainly the metropolitan area as a whole, what's your idea for reestablishing the political power we had so that you can do anything?
Well, first of all, Dave, you're not going to be able to reestablish the power because the population base has shrunk. We don't have the legislators, and we don't have the legislators with the kind of seniority that we've had in the past, and we're going to have to wait 20 years and re-elect Roger or Harry for the next 20 years until he's in his 60s and I'm in his 80s to reestablish that kind of power. I have a simple fundamental notion that the best way to get what you want is to be honest and forthright. And it has always been the way I've operated. You take unpleasant things, the elephants in the room, if we're talking about Republicans, or maybe the donkeys in the room if you're talking about Democrats, and you raise all subjects and you be as honest as possible. We are an increasingly smaller part of this state's population, but we are a valuable area that I have seen ignored since we've lost all that legislative power that we used to have. And I think we have some compelling arguments to make to people in the suburbs to help us out. And to the extent that we can build honest coalitions with people who respect our representatives for their kind of integrity, we can have some kind of influence that maybe mirrors the great longevity and the huge legislative delegation that we used to have. Right. That's how I would approach it.
I think Dave asked me to go last, so I'll respect it.
So you'll do that.
Well,
go ahead.
I'll go. I think we need to, speak and make those connections. It's all about networking and making connections in there, and being willing to speak to these other legislatures that are down there and build those coalitions, because there is huge value in our area. And the state as a whole loves this area, and they want to see it benefit and be a great place to go to. Because even though the suburbs is a big player and stuff like that, they come up here. I'm always going along Canal Park and hanging out, talking to the different tourists and people. They're coming up from St. Paul, and those people benefit from this area. So we have this resource, and making those connections and educating them more about that is a key part to that, building those coalitions.
Sure.
Building coalitions. Well, reality is northeastern Minnesota probably is going to lose a House seat with redistricting, and so that just broadens it out farther. And 20, 30 years ago, you had the range versus Duluth, and sometimes that little debate rears its ugly head. We can't afford to do that anymore. We need to understand what's good for Duluth is good for the range, and what's good for the range is good for Duluth, for example. And we need to build working with that. And we have some good leadership in the state that comes from our area, so we need to work with that. But it isn't just coalitions of geography, it's coalitions of party, it's coalitions of all kinds of different things. If I go to St. Paul being a freshman, I have no illusion of how much I'm going to get done. I'm going to be a freshman. So we're going to have to work in those coalitions and speak respectfully of what we need.
Roche. Roger?
Well,
Roach.
we know each other a little too well. I would say two things. First of all, people love Duluth. And many of you who have come down for Duluth Days know that I've tried to make my office the Southern Visit Duluth Tourism Office. And I've worked really hard on supporting Duluth Days because people love Duluth. And that's a great thing to have. But anybody who's had a personal relationship that maybe hasn't worked out knows that emotions can be fickle. So the long-term success is building a coalition around regional centers. And that's something I started in 2009 around the LGA issue, because my belief is the LGA, as we know it, will not be around even another 5 years. So what do we do differently? And the solution was Democrat and Republican, people that represented Moorhead, Mankato, St. Cloud, Rochester, and Duluth, we met every other week during that session and talked about the issue. Now layer on Minneapolis and St. Paul, who have the same core issues we do around housing, transportation, aging infrastructure, and we have a very powerful coalition that can be successful into the future.
Last question.
Bill Bennett, a few years ago, the legislature passed a thing called the Transportation Taxpayer Accountability Act. And basically what that said was that in order for, once DOT, or in this case it's transportation, DOT wants to hire a consultant like private firms, they have to ask for a proposal from internal ASME in order to compete. And there's a whole process you have to go through. The result was, after years of tracking, the result was that private business, hands down, 95% of the time was cheaper than what the state could do. Hogan Miller came forward and wanted to expand that to all state agencies. How will you balance, and I'd like to first go to Carrie and to Jay with this question, how will you balance the politics of ASME needing to grow their members versus private firms trying to stay in business?
Great question. Good question. I guess I'm going to respond by saying it goes back to what we expect government to do. I believe in government. So I think we have to reset priorities. If we're talking about outsourcing things that government's supposed to be doing, I think that's just a bad idea. But if we're doing things that government, as a community, we don't think want them to do that, then I think the private sector plays. So how do you do that? I'm not real sure, but I think state government needs to take a look at its priorities and what it can and cannot do. I mean, we had proposals that private sector should plow roads versus public sector. That's an expectation people have of government. Whereas there might be other services that government provides that don't need to be a government service.
Like engineering?
Some engineering. Well, because you get caught up in, you know, people complain about government and it's too technical, but take engineering, for example. Government can't afford a lawsuit and it gets sued all the time. So it has to cover its backside, and it does it sometimes by over-regulating.
Okay, we have very little time left, so I'm going to give each of you a chance to respond quickly to that question.
Well, I just think that private business can do stuff more effectively most of the time, and finding ways to enable private business to do stuff more cost effectively is the best policies, and to pursue those policies.
Well, Bill's come and visited with me on this, so I know the issue well. But you know, the challenge is that in many cases we don't have the expertise in-house to do it, and so putting roadblocks between getting a good project done at an affordable rate and high quality is not good state policy.
I'm aware that the public employees exercise a great deal of political influence both in the local level here in Duluth and at the state level. And to the extent that their motivation is protecting the union and their membership, I would approach their proposals with a fair amount of caution, because like Jay and some of the others here, I believe that sometimes private industry unencumbered with the kinds of strings that get thrown into government is a much better way to go. That's a very general thought, but we don't have a lot of time, and I'll leave it at that.
All right. Very cool. Well, let's give our guest today a round of applause.